Okay, we have action. Maybe, maybe not. Can you all hear me? I'm loud enough anyway, aren't I? I'm loud enough. Anyway, okay. Sorry to those of you joining us from PCF. Sorry to those of you joining us from PCF. We are in this church here towards the end of a series of readings that were inspired by the theologian Tom Wright. And this is his 15 essential texts, and we're up to number 14. So I'm afraid you've come a bit at the end. Okay, and we've gone some strange places, haven't we? Oh my heavens, we got lost in Daniel. In fact, I think Charlotte was the one who actually preached on that one, weren't you? Bless you. I happened to be away. Hey ho. But yes, so this is the end of a journey, or towards the end of a journey, that we have been all the way through the scripture from scratch. And we have been following Tom Wright's reflection on why these particular parts of the scripture are worth dealing with. Last week, we were in Romans, and he was encouraging us to think in a whole new way. Be new people, think in a new way, go to seek God in a new way. And now we come to Revelation. About how often in a year would I normally preach on Revelation? That would be a big round number. A big round number. An actual round, because actually it's quite scary, is Revelation, isn't it? It's quite scary. Now, one of the dreadful things that has happened this past week is I heard that the Admiralty are going to stop printing Admiralty charts for ships. And having come from the Navy, this is a great shame. And having worked with the Admiralty chart, the Hydrographic Office, in producing them, this is great sadness, because it means that my illustration goes even further out of date. That actually very, very early Admiralty charts, when the places around the world had not been surveyed, and you'll be amazed how many of those there still are, would say something like, here be dragons. Yeah, here be dragons. At least that's the swallows and Amazons in me coming out. Well, in Revelation, here be dragons. And Revelation is divided into different sections. And in some respects, it starts really well and very easily. And back in March, wasn't it? I took the deacons and the elders away for a day, and we looked at the start of the letter, which this is, the start of the letter, but which is the letters to the 7 churches, what the Spirit says to the 7 churches, which is all gathered around the Eastern Mediterranean, and giving the readers an understanding of what happens when churches don't quite work. So the easy bit is the opening of the book of Revelation. It's very much like one of Paul's letters. I'm writing to you at these churches, telling you you're doing it wrong. There's a lot of that, isn't there, in Paul? I'm writing to you, telling you you're doing it wrong. Okay, so that's okay. And then you get to the wacky stuff. Then you get to stuff where there really are dragons. And it is a bit scary. And some of it is to do with what was happening in the Roman Empire at the time. Some of it is to do with what happened when the Roman Empire fell, and some of it is to do with what's going to happen at the end times. And if anyone tells you they know exactly which bit is which, they're lying. Really. It's all mixed up. All we know is that John, who was introduced to us by Jill a few months ago, had this vision, and we understand it's a divinely inspired vision. And when the end times come, we will jolly well know about it. And then we get to the final couple of chapters of Revelation. And it's a bit like we've been through this massive storm of picture after picture, which we really can't imagine some of them, and all sorts of things happening, some quite violent and some wonderful. And we find ourselves really at the end of the letter here in chapter 21, and suddenly we understand it again. Or at least we can pretend to when we're preaching. So we come back to something as really the culmination of everything which we have. Now, this passage, if you read around the passage, this particular part of the Bible comes immediately after the judgment. So if you go back into chapter 20, a few verses, this is when we have an understanding that what we've done on earth is going to be revealed, and have eternal consequences, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So this understanding that we come to these pictures that we get are after John has seen something to do with the judgment. And he sees a new heaven and a new earth. This isn't a patch-up job. This isn't a patch-up job. Whatever's happening now is taking away the whole of what's previously happened. It said that they passed away. This isn't a patch-up job. It gets to so far when you're fixing stuff, you go, you know what, we can't do this anymore. We have to start from scratch. And this is what has happened. Now, if John's writing to Jewish readers, and some of them would have been, they would have known a little bit about how the law occasionally acted a bit like a patch-up job, in terms of every year there was a Day of Atonement. Supposedly they had to send the scapegoat out into the wilderness with the sins of the people on it. There were sacrifices, but all the sacrifices, the scapegoat, the Day of Atonement, the whole of the Levitical code kind of repeats and repeats and repeats. And you have an understanding that it is a patch-up job. What John brings to us here is, this is it. This is brand new. No more patch-up job. What we get here is the final effort to make things brand new. So let's run through it. Verse 1, and it's a water story. Now, those who've heard me speak before know I get a little bit excited about water stories. And if you go through the Bible, there's lots and lots and lots of water stories. And I would have to say, hand on heart, I'd never picked this one at all ever before. Partly because it's saying there's no water, which is a bit sad. But it's still a water story. And if you think about water throughout the Bible, it usually has a number of different meanings to it. Obviously, it's describing water, but we have an understanding of how God works when water appears in the Bible. It's one of those things for me, anytime there's a mention of water, ears prick up. Hello, what's going on with that? And if we run through the scripture from the start, we get a pattern. What happens in Genesis chapter 1? Where is the Spirit of God moving? On the waters. It's there to start off with. And it's there for the first of the great acts of redemption, as God brings order from chaos. God brings the creation and brings order from chaos. Let's move forward a few. Let's have Noah's flood, bringing life out of death. God moves in action to bring life out of death. Let's move again. What about the story of Exodus? God moves through the Red Sea, bringing freedom from slavery. Let's move right the way up to when Jesus died. What did John report happened when he died? Spear in his side, blood and water flowed from his side. And you go around, weren't any of the water stories in the Bible, Moses in the bulrushes, and they all speak of the same thing. The power over water is reserved for God alone. So if you read through Isaiah, some of the greatest condemnation are for the false gods of other nations who are supposed to be in charge of the weather. And then we come back to the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel, pouring water all over the bulls, and God had power over that, and the drought was finished. Everywhere you look in the Bible, a water story says God is moving in power, uniquely in power, which, for those of you who want to do this sort of thing, if you go into John's Gospel, the first miracle or sign that John reports is, of course, water into wine. And if you read that from the prologue, which he's already said Jesus is God, it's kind of, and here is the proof, because only God has power over water, and look what Jesus has just done. And it's a great one. If the Jehovah's Witnesses turn up on the doorstep, put that in their faces, effectively, here we go. You say Jesus isn't God, Scripture says he is. So it's a water story, it gets me all excited. Water in the Bible, whenever it's mentioned, is a prelude to God's majestic, powerful work, uniquely his work, No one else can do it. God alone has power over water. But also, if we go right back to Genesis, the Spirit of God moving across the waters, this is when God brings order from chaos. For the Hebrew people, who were basically land-based people, water was often regarded as where God could not be, because water was chaos. The Hebrew people were never great seafarers. Water is chaos. Water is where you go to escape from God. What do you think Jonah did? Oh, blimey, I better escape from God's will. I'll go somewhere God can't find me, and that will be at sea. And we know how well that went. But as far as the Hebrew people are concerned, water, at least the sea, is chaos. So when we get to this particular reading, this particular passage, when it says there's no more sea, it's not so old salts like me can be upset. It's so that actually there's no chaos. There is nothing anywhere which represents anywhere you can go where God can't be. The chaos has gone. I'll say that again. There's nothing anywhere, nowhere you can go where God cannot be. The fact there's no sea means anything you understand about the sea as being chaos, the absence of God, where the Leviathan things, all the Hebrew folklore about how the sea is being away from God. If the sea's not there, there's nowhere you can go where you are away from God. And later on in verse 6, he brings water back again as only he can bring, the water of life, the water of life. God alone has authority over water, which then gets me to scratch my head a bit when we have policies around that privatize water and make a market out of water. Are we actually engaging in a blasphemy by doing something like that? Okay, verse 2, don't worry, it doesn't take long for all the verses now. I will skip over them at the end. Verse 2, a new Jerusalem. I love this image, a new Jerusalem. And I read from this, and we can argue about this at some point if you think I'm wrong, which is absolutely fine, because what we do is we dive into the scripture and try and understand what's going on. A new Jerusalem, something to do with human action extending into eternity. We've just read the account of what the judgment is going to be like. But I do not get, and I will not preach an understanding that what we do here is simply getting our ticket for which escalator we get when we die. That doesn't work for me. And I don't think the scripture supports this in any respect. What we do matters for eternity. Yes, it matters with the time with God, or eternity without God. Of course, that's where we come to an understanding of salvation versus not salvation. But there is something also about who we are and what we do extends into eternity. Otherwise, all we have in faith is holy insurance. And it can't possibly be that God's dealings with humanity for thousands and thousands of years have all been about holy insurance. That can't be right. There is something that we have that takes us into eternity. Those of you old enough like me to remember the film Ghost, one or two nods, one or two blank looks, okay? At the end, Patrick Swayze, now of blessed memory, says, the love you have, you take it with you. Now, that may or may not be true, and the scripture may take that, but there's something we take with us into eternity. A city is a human construction. A city is a human construction. And we have this new Jerusalem. And what I read from here is that what we have done that is good, what we have done that is worthy, this isn't to do with the escalator we get. This is to do with something of worth that continues into eternity. Human good is in eternity. That is the new Jerusalem, the city that we are presented with. Human good is there. The New Jerusalem is beautiful. We are, I'm sure, co-creators with God. I have no doubt of this, that we are co-creators with God. And the New Jerusalem brings this to the fore. After all, if we have parenthood, we are co-creating with God, are we not? Looking at scientific and health advances, we are co-creating with God, are we not? I think we have to put to death an understanding that God is holy, doesn't touch us, and we are material, and that's horrible, because that is what's known as one of the Gnostic heresies. Take you back into first century theology there. We co-create with God. God chooses to be with us. We are not wholly divorced from God. And here we have, right at the end of the story, a new city, a human creation, which means that what we do lasts into eternity. Which takes us to verse 3. Verse 3, the great cry which echoes throughout the whole Bible. And now the dwelling of God is with human beings. The dwelling of God is with human beings. And this is the plan all along. This was the plan from Eden onwards. Remember how that went well? And yet God was going to be in the Garden of Eden with the humans he had created in love. And we kind of messed that up. And then if we go back across the series with apologists of PCF people, across the series, we've been in the desert and we've been given the law. And the point about the law at Sinai was that God was saying, and this is how we are going to live together. These are the parties we're going to have. I'm going to be with you in the promised land. God will be with human beings going into the promised land. Go back to Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 28, where he says, they will be my people and I will be their God, which I think is some of the most powerful words in the scripture. And here it is at the end of time, being celebrated to be actually true. I'm looking at the time now, and we do have to gather around the table, so I'll move on, if I might, to verses 5 and 6, briefly. We are being given, or John is being given and repeating to us, a vision of this new heaven, new earth, new city. And this is not, to quote the blessed Jim Byrne of blessed memory, look what you could have won. I don't know if you remember Bullseye, maybe best forgotten, but at the end of the game show, if you had not achieved that which you needed to achieve, you are still shown the prize, which is just bizarre. And it's more than likely a speedboat. I mean, what? A speedboat or a caravan? Even more, what? And Jim Byrne would go, look what you could have won. And everyone would applaud. And the contestants would go, oh, pretty good I didn't then, isn't it? But this is not, look what I could have won. Look what we could have won. This is, look what is going to be. Look what is going to be. We have already won this, or rather Christ has won it for us. This isn't going to be revealed to us at the end of time and gone, you know what, you could have had a new heaven, and you could have had a new earth, and you could have had a new Jerusalem, but you never quite made it. No, this is ours. This is a promise which, as it says in the scripture itself, is good and true. I've got to the bit of my notes which says, so what? So you can all wake up now, for those of you who have just drifted off somewhere else. The so what of the water story that tells us that there's nowhere we can think of where God will now not be. The so what of the New Jerusalem, where we understand something of ourselves is co-creating with God, something that here in the scripture is beautiful. The so what of actually the culmination of the whole of the scriptural story, God's dealings with humanity from century to century to century, that the dwelling place of God is with human beings. The so what is that Revelation is an opportunity to look up. This isn't jam tomorrow. This isn't the opium of the people, like how it is now, because look what's tomorrow. No. This is genuinely looking forward to what happens in the end time. And as we look in Revelation, as we pull back the veil a bit from the future, it's time to pause on our journey, recognize the biggest truth, and say it again: the outworking of God's love for us. Going to invite Julia